All right, we're ready to start? Oh, okay. Okay. Well, welcome everybody. I'm glad you all came to this. I'm going to talk about how to write a long series. And before I even get into that, I'm going to say right now, everything I tell you is right for me. It may be right for you. Some of it may be, some of it may not be, because I tell you exactly how not to write a long series. And then someone will get up and say, that's exactly what I did. And I wrote 28 books and it's great. So just remember that everything I say is different. Everybody's different. Everybody's readers are different. So I'm going to talk about mine first, and then I'm going to talk about some other genres and things like that too. So first of all, my name's Jay Allan. If you don't know who I am, I've written 52 books. I sold about 3.5 million copies, and I generally write in series. I think I wrote two books that weren't in any series. Other than that, they're all in series. So, and my longest series is my current one. It's 17 books, and I'm about to do the 18th, and that's the final one. So, I've gotten pretty good at writing long books, mostly because science fiction, honestly, that's what I found my fans wanted. I didn't start out trying to write long series. But every book I put out sold very well, and then the next one sold very well, and people wanted more. So I evaluated my storylines, and I started stretching them out and coming up with new storylines. And that's one thing that I find, if you want to keep a series going, a long series, and whatever a long series is, I'm going to say it's 6 books or more maybe, or whatever, but you need to have a complicated storyline, a lot of storylines, and a long storyline, because if you just have one thing, it's going to get very boring after a while. My stories have lots of characters. I do kill characters fairly often, so not all the time, but and not all of them, but I do kill a lot of main characters over time, and so I have new ones coming in all the time. If you read my books, by the time the first book that you get to book 17, a lot of the characters are gone. So that's the one thing that's very important, is deciding what you want to do as far as that. If you're not going to kill characters, or if you are going to kill characters and things like that, but that's one of the things that I find is very important, is to get a style for the series. Things that you're going to do the same way every time. I mean, if you killed 20 characters in the first book and then nobody in the second and third books, it's going to be a little bit strange. So, obviously, that's true of all books. Like if you're writing, if you're an author who does something, and you write books, and you do kill or don't kill characters or do something else, you're probably going to do the same thing every time. But it's very important in a series. You really want to keep it consistent and keep it feeling. That is very straightforward. So that's one thing. Second thing is, let's see, what I want to say is, when you do a series and you introduce characters, what I'm trying to say is, when you introduce characters into the series, you want to figure out where they're going to go in the whole thing. And I'm sorry, I'm a little bit slow here. I'm going to get up, I think. Sorry, it's been a long week so far, and I'm kind of tired. So, but what I think you definitely want to do with a character, with your characters, is have them have interpersonal relationships, and have them have the multiple sides in the. I'm sorry. Have Okay, hold on. Yeah, I'm okay. I'm sorry. I'm very tired. I'm just give me a second. Have multiple sides in your storyline. How are they going to be? Like, is one side totally evil and one side's totally good, or is one side basically good and one side's basically evil, or are they a little bit of each? Because the truth of the matter is, again, this is the kind of thing that's easy to bounce around as you go in a series. It's the kind of thing that you can change, and you don't want to change it that much. If you start out with a good versus an evil, a very setting, you want to keep that. You don't want all of a sudden in book 6 your evil characters are starting to be sort of understandable or sort of. Oh, thank you very much. Yeah, that helped them. You want to keep it consistent in your storyline. So when you start with a series, when you start intending to write a series, you really have to think in terms of how far it's going to go, how far it may go, and you have to plan that out in your characters. So if you're going to write 10 books or 12 books or something like that, you really have to think what's going to happen in book 1, what's going to happen in book 2, what's going to happen in book 3. Because if you just bounce around, it's going to become difficult to do. Because if you write book 1, you want each book. This is one thing I think is very important. You want each book to end. You want each book to end. And when I say end, I mean end with a finish, where something that really, really happens. So you want, if you read reviews on series and you want to look for bad reviews on series, you're going to find one thing above all else. People are going to complain when, oh, the book didn't even end. It just stopped. Okay? That is, I think, one thing that is true for most series. If you want to do book 2, book 3, book 4, you've got to end book 1. Then you've got to end book 2. You've got to end book 3. The books have to have a beginning and an ending, and then the next book continues the storyline, but it doesn't continue it continues the storyline, the greater storyline, but you have to end the storyline in each book. I think that's very important. That's one thing that a lot of people don't do. It's one thing I didn't think of when I first started, but honestly, I think it's very important. You have to write each book like it's an individual book, like it's going to end. That's very important, because if you don't do that, it's very easy, and I can tell you this from writing, it's very, very easy to get into the habit of going on and just stopping it and ending a storyline and not worrying about an individual storyline in the series in the book. And that's a problem. So you definitely want to do that. You definitely want to make sure that you do that, especially in a long series, because you're going to have changes. Now, one thing I do in a series also, I'll tend to have, like my newest series, my longest series, I have 6-book outlines. So I have the first 6 books were basically one storyline. The second 6 books are a different storyline happening a couple years later, same basic characters, but it was a different storyline. And then the third 6 books are the same thing. So at some point, you've got to know when to let go of something and go on to something else. If you're going to tell the story of, if it's a war or whatever, and you're going to just do the same thing over and over and over again, at some point people will get tired of it. They'll get sick of it. You'll start losing readers. You'll have more and more that will leave. So that's what you don't want. Want to make sure that you keep in putting change in, putting new storylines, putting variations in. That's very, very important. So that's one thing. Secondly, characters. You want to have main characters. You're probably going to have some main characters, whether you kill characters or not. You're probably going to have some main characters that you have in the whole series. And it's very important to think them out clearly. Like my series, my current series is 22 years has passed in 17 books. So that just goes to show, you have to keep, some of the books have breaks between them, like a couple years, 2-3 years, and then you go back into a new storyline. I think that's important. I think you really have to think about what you like to read, what you'd be interested in, and how do you create that. It really takes a little more thought than you think, because it's very difficult to think a whole series through. Obviously, you're not going to start on book 1 and know what you want to do on book 18. That's a ridiculous thing to say. But you have to have some idea where you want to go. Like if you're gonna have something taking place, if you're gonna have a battle or a war or something like that, think to yourself, how many books can I take this out on? And then I have to have another change. So am I going to go 6 books? Am I going to go 3 books with this? And then I'm going to have an abrupt change. Maybe I'm going to break a storyline or something like that. Maybe I'm going to take some time to do something else. But that's an important thing to do too. So, let me see. You know, I was thinking about writing down for this, and I should have, but I just couldn't think of what to put. But I did this. I've done this before, but this presentation before. But anyway, what I wanted to talk about was the series. So okay, I'm sorry. I'm just very tired, and it's affecting my performance. But give me a second. All right. When you do a series, you have to decide what you want to do. Now, I do science fiction, okay? So in mine, science fiction is practically made for series. The fans demand it. They really want it, and they'll do it. Other things are harder to do with series, like romance, for example, strikes me. I mean, romance, let's be honest, everybody wants them to end up together in the first book, in a classic romance. How do you make a series out of that? There are definitely ways to do it, but I think it's harder. So whatever your genre is, how do you do it? Do you do a series that's just an ongoing storyline, which is mostly what I've done? Or do you do a series that is a group of characters that just take place, and maybe they don't even have anything really to do with each other? Like, for example, a detective story. You have a character, he solves a mystery, that's a book. Next book is same character, but he solves a different mystery. They're not really the same. So those are different series, but they're both series. So what do you want to do? What is your plan to write? You have to think about that, and you have to really decide how you want to go. And that's one thing to do. And that's going to depend a lot on your genre, too. For example, science fiction is very good in the genre going on and on with storyline. Other series, other genres aren't as good with that. They're better for the episodic ones, like the detective or something like that. So it really just depends. And the episodic ones can be totally unrelated. Not unrelated, but the same character. They can not mention it, or they can refer to the older. In other words, the storyline can be, okay, this is his mystery in this series, but it refers to what happened in the first book. Second book, third book refers to what happens in the second and first. Or it can almost be like the first and second books don't exist. And the one advantage of that kind of series, as opposed to the more episodic, the more sequential series like science fiction is concerned, is they can be read in any direction, in any order. If you write a series about detective, I mean, in all honesty, and there's 10 books, and it's all the same detective, but they're all individual mysteries. One giant advantage that series has, that my type of series doesn't really have, is that you can start anywhere in the series pretty much the same way. You can read book 7, you can read book 9, you can read book 10, and you can go on anywhere else and do whatever you want to do. If my books, you really kind of have to read them from the beginning. You don't have to, but you're better off if you do. So that's one thing to think about. What's your genre? What do you do? So, also, I think one of the things that is relevant in a series is the storyline, in the sense like what's going on in the series. My series generally have a story per book, and then a storyline per, as I was saying, 6 books previously, and then a whole overall story. So you have multiple storylines of different lengths that come about at different speeds that tell a different story. Like my Blood and the Star series, which I'm doing now, the first book was a completely different story from the second book, but they were all telling part of the same 6-book series. So that's very important to do also because it gives readers satisfaction. In other words, you give readers the satisfaction of a book finishing, of a storyline finishing. They get the allure of something being done, but they're also still enticed. If you leave them totally enticed, if you don't give them any satisfaction, a lot of times they're going to be very unhappy with that. They're going to complain about it. They're going to have they're going to be like, oh, this is just chopped up into pieces, and that's not what they want. They want to read a story, but they also want to read a series. So that's what you want to do. So you really need to think in terms of that, your storyline. How are you going to divide it up? What are you going to end quickly? What are you going to end in the book? Because you really do need to give them a terminus. You have to give them an ending to the book, like they feel they read a book. But you also have to leave them wanting more, reading something else. So that's something to think about in a series. To me, that's probably the most important thing to do in a series, is to have different levels of storytelling. In other words, have the storytelling that does take place in the one book, but also have the longer terms. And if it's a long series like mine is, you want to have multiple levels. You want to have a group of books, a group of stories that finish in 6 books, in 8 books, in 10 books, whatever. You want to keep doing that because at some point, one of the hardest things to do in a series, in all honesty, is not to just do the same thing over and over again. In other words, write a very similar book. It's very much the same as the old one, and the next one's very much the same as the one before that. That's very easy to do. I've done it too. You really want to keep things changing, keep things moving, keep things, keep new characters coming in, keep new events coming in, keep new things that people didn't see happening. I think that's very important as well. So that's one thing you want to do, is to do that. That's very important because it's very crucial. So, but that's one thing. The series is. The series is. I'm sorry. Okay. The series is something that you want to think about from the beginning. So, what is your series going to be? Like if you're going to write a mystery series, as I said, you might have just individual books. If you're going to write a science fiction series, you might have a storyline. And then you have to decide what's going to happen in each book because that's very important as well. And then you have to, what the hell was I going to say? You have to, okay. The book, a book is, all right. I am when you write the book, when you write a series, a long series, you want to make it very interesting. You want to make it very factual. You want to keep things for later books. So, for example, if you have something that's going to happen, maybe you want it to happen in book 3, book 4, book 5, book 6. It's very important to not rush, to not put things out of order. It's very difficult to sit down and plot out a whole series. It really is. But you want to come up with some ideas. In other words, you're not going to maybe come up with the whole story for book 12 when you're starting book 1 or 2 or 3. But you want to have some idea of some things that are going to happen, of some basic premises that are going to take place, because it's very important that your whole series fit together very well. If you write a series and you write it very well and you keep it going, you can keep it going for a long time. I know people who've written series that are 30, 40 books long, and they still sell a lot of books because they've kept it interesting. But their books, by the time they get to book 30 or book 40, the difference between that and book 1 in terms of storyline, characters, and things like that is very substantial. There's some things that are the same, obviously, but for the most part, if you're going to do the same thing over and over again, you're probably not going to get that far because you're going to start to lose people, and you will get people who complain, who decide that they loved everything up to book 12, but book 13 was no good, and they're not going to read anymore. So that's one thing you also have to realize. My current series, I got to book 14, and they were the same or sold even more than the ones before them. They did very well. Around book 15, they started to decline a bit. Not badly, but I could see that the series was getting close to the point where it was starting to lose a few more people than it was gaining. And I don't plan to go to 18 anyway, so that's what I did. So, and I'd say that my book 17 sold probably 70% of what book 13 or 14 did, 75%. So you can see that it starts to decline. And, of course, new people come in on book 1, too, but they have a long way to go at that point. So you have to, realize that that's one of the things that's happening, too. So, but things to do in a series that are not doable in a book, or generally not doable in a book, is you can have a longer storyline. And by that I mean you can tell a very long piece about a war, about anything, about a journey in space, about or again, if you're another genre, about anything like that. You can do it any way you want, but you can go on and on and on. And that's very important to do because you have to keep it interesting. You have to keep things coming out that are very interesting and get people's attention. So yes. Yeah, sorry about that. Go ahead.
Would a good example of that be like the episode 4, 5, and 6 for Star Wars, where you've got the whole galactic empire thing going on as the larger overall story in basically a 3-part series?
I'm going to be very careful about getting into Star Wars here because I know people feel differently about it. But yeah,
I'm just using it as an example.
No,
of
I'm
how
just
it was
saying,
put
yeah.
Together. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, look, Star Wars was the first 3 books were, I guess, the middle 3 now. I don't, were a good series. I mean, they were definitely they went right after each other. They were different storylines. I mean, they really were, a little bit, but they were basically the same overall storyline, and it kind of ended. So that made a good 3-book series. Now the 3 earlier books, the 3 earlier movies, were also that they were perfect example of what I was talking about, in that they were storylines in the same storyline. Clearly, I mean, obviously they were the part of the same story, but they were a different era. They were 20 years before, whatever, and they were different in that way. And then the later 3, whether you like them or not, they were written several years later, and they were also, so that was a good example of what I was trying to say, what I was saying very badly, but what I was trying to say was you keep things in 3 books, 3 movies is a reasonable number to pursue a storyline. But when you go to 6, 9, 12, you want to change it around somewhat. And that's what they did on Star Wars. They went right back to they went to prequel, actually. They went back in time, but it's the same thing whether you go forward or you go back. There were a lot of different characters, a few were the same. So that's also a kind of a thing that where you want to change things and have different characters come in and out and everything. So Star Wars is a good example, whether or not you think they were great movies or not, because I know some people do and some people don't. But all of them, I mean, but the general outline of it, the general way it was done, is a perfect example of a series. And it's how to make a series interesting, how to keep it from getting boring, because you do have a 9-book series or 9-movie series, but you also have 3 separate things that are, the 3 were pretty much straight line, but then there was a gap between. So that makes a lot of sense, and that's what I'm trying to say. I wasn't doing a very good job. Is you want to think that way. Now, if you were deciding to do a 9-book series from the beginning, whether you're going to do it that way or another way, I think you have to realize that 9 books done all the same chasing the same thing, one battle after another in a war or something, will start to get boring most of the time. Now, it doesn't mean you can't write one. It doesn't mean you can't write 25 books, all the same storyline without bringing anything into it or anything, whatever. But I'm going to tell you, it's very difficult to do because it gets very easy to sit down and basically write the same book. Book 12 is the same as book 13, more or less. I changed a little bit, but to keep it interesting, to keep it vital and changing and bringing new things that get people interested and keep people excited and anxious to read book 14 after 13, you really have to. I'm not saying that 2 books that are similar is going to be a problem, but 3 or 4 or 5, at some point you're going to start losing people. And that is the death of a series. When you're writing a series, the one thing you want, and that is true whether it's, again, mystery or romance or science fiction, it doesn't really matter. The only thing that really matters is keeping readers. I mean, you really have to keep your readers. And that's the one thing I'm saying. That's the one thing that's hard in a series sometimes is doing, because what will happen is no matter what you do, no matter how you write, no matter how well you do it or how poorly you do it or how differently you do it, you're going to lose people every book. I mean, that's just true. If you're selling any decent number of books, you're going to lose some people. You're going to gain new people who read book 1. That's a fact too. I mean, it's just the way it works. So the key is to keep more people coming in than going out. And the way to do that, I think, is to keep it interesting and keep it changing. So book 2 does not have to be that different, I don't think, from book 1, but book 6 better be, because otherwise you're going to have lost a lot of people. Every book is exactly the same. And even though it seems like people want it, people do want some things the same, but they really don't want the storyline the same. The story's got to change a lot. Like in my series, I mean, the first book is different than the second and third. They're pretty similar. And then the fourth and fifth are different. So it changes like that. You know, it goes 1 or 2 books covering something, and then it goes on to another a related storyline, a lot of the same characters, but it does change a little bit. And that's very important to do. And that's very important to do no matter, I think, what genre you're in. I mean, if you just do the exact same thing over and over again, in my experience, you will start to lose a lot of readers, and that will be the death knell of the series eventually. I mean, you can keep writing it, but if you sell book 1 to, I don't know how many, 50,000 people, and then you sell book 2 to 30,000, and you sell book 3 to 10,000, you're going in the wrong direction. At some point, you're going to probably want to change and just start something new. And you're losing people, too, that you're losing. You as an author want to keep readers interested in your books. That doesn't mean they have to like every book you write. But when you're doing a series, you really have to think about that. I mean, if I'm writing a 10-book series and I'm on book 3 and I lose somebody, am I writing only that series? Am I writing something else that they're going to like, that they're going to read right away? Or are they going to have to wait till I write 7 more books that they're not going to read and then remember me and then read my new series? That's something to consider also. I think that's one of the main things with a series is that it's very easy to make a success, build on a success. But one of the problems with a series is also, especially for a new writer, and this is really important to think about, is what happens if you don't sell a lot of the first book? I mean, what happens if you don't? Now, that's true in any book, but if you're just writing a book, you write another book, and you write another book, and maybe one of them takes off. But do you write book 2 when book 1 sold a disappointing amount? Do you write book 3? Do you write book 4? Do you write 10 books or 12 books if that's what you were thinking? I think that's one thing that you have to be willing to do, is take it into consideration and make a decision one step at a time. I'm not a big fan of just abandoning a series. I wouldn't do that no matter what, even if you didn't sell a lot. But what I tell you what I would do is take something that I was thinking might be 6, 8, 10 books and maybe make it 3. and then get on to something else. I mean, I wouldn't just stop a book that was clearly part of a series, because honestly, then you're just crapping on the customers that you do have, and that's not a way to I don't feel that's the way to act, and that's not the way to do it. And maybe it will pick up a little bit, but it's going to be much, much, much harder to take book 1 that didn't do very well and have book 2 do well. Much harder than it is to start with another book 1. So what I would say is, my recommendation for anybody, especially someone relatively new starting a series, is your own head. What you're thinking is yours. So think about it as a long series. Think about it as 20 books, 10 books, whatever you want. Think about all the storylines that you'd like to cover. Also think about what's going to happen if it doesn't sell as well as you want it to. Will you be better off starting with something new? Would it be good to be able to wrap it up in 3 books or 2 books? My shortest series is 2 books. So, I mean, and my longest series is 18, like I said. So, and I have a couple in between. So it really depends on what you want to do. But I think you have to, again, talking as a writer who A, wants to make a living as a writer, but B, also wants to give readers what they want too. You really have to be able to make a decision once in a while based on what makes sense for you in your market. And if you maybe you thought a series was going to be great and it wasn't, or sometimes something could be great but it just doesn't take off. It doesn't get attention for whatever reason, and you want to start something new. I think you need to be able to dial it back, maybe cut it down, and then get on and start something new. That's one of the things. Because like my 18-book series, I've been writing it for 5 years now, so that's a long time. And it's not the only books I've written, but it's pretty close to the only books I've written. So now that series was successful, so that was fine. But if that was if that series had not sold very well, and I was writing it 15 books, 16 books, 17 books, and not selling very many, it's not just that you're writing books and not selling very many. You're fading out of the marketplace. You're not people aren't seeing your books anymore because they're not looking at that series anymore, and they're not seeing something new. So my recommendation for someone who writes a series that turns out to be disappointing, and that's different level for everybody, but if it turns out to be truly disappointing, is maybe to write a couple more books and finish it, but maybe not do them all right in order. Maybe start another series. Maybe write book 2 and then start another series and then write book 3 or something like that. Think that way. And that depends on how you feel about finishing a series. I mean, if you don't mind not finishing something, that's fine. To me, I would not do that. I think it's important to at least come up with a finish. And if you could think about how you had something that you thought would be 12 books or 15 books and how you can finish it in 3. Well, the truth is, if you were going to go 12 or 15 books, you were going to cover more storylines. You were going to cover more things. So now you go paring back. And maybe you do less. And this is true also, by the way, of a book that does okay, but you think maybe a new one will do better. Maybe you came up with a new idea. So that's one thing that's important too to remember. If you decide that you want a series to become shorter than you were thinking at one point, that's fine too. Just make your judgments. You have to combine both your marketing judgments, your judgments as professionals, with your judgment as a professional writer. I mean, you really have to do both, because if you want to be successful, if you want to sell a lot of books, you have to do both well. You obviously have to write good books. You have to write books that people are going to want to read, or they're not going to read them. But I can tell you there are a lot of writers out there who do write good books that don't get noticed very, very easily, or they don't get noticed on the first one or second one or third one. And that's part of it too. You really have to think in terms of, how do I make something work? How do I make a series work? And then also, how do you promote a series when you're doing it? And by that I mean, what do you do? Now, obviously, most of you have mailing lists. We all have mailing lists. You're going to do that to promote each new book that comes out. I have a Facebook group. I assume a lot of you do too. I do a lot of posting on that. That's very important with a series too, because I have a lot of people that are very anxious for the 18th book of my series now. So it's the last book. They know it's the last book. And you get a lot of people on there that complain it's the last book. Oh, it could go on for longer, but it's time. I really do feel it's time to end it, and it's a good point for me to end it. I could now. How could I continue it? I would just take the storyline further. Maybe I'd go another 5-10 years in the future and put another storyline in. I could do it, but I also think that I've done enough of this, and I think that's basically where most people are. I think they're happy, so that's what I'm going to do on it. So that's my feeling on that. But but I could have ended that series at 6 books or 3 books too. So just remember that. And then it would have something else going on now that I don't have going on. Maybe it would be selling more. I don't know. So you just really have to decide all the time. Take your decisions and make your decision. Can I write this series the best, or can I write a new series the best? And make rational judgments on both counts. Like I said, I really suspect that you're better off finishing a series, but where you finish it is more up to you. And you just change your writing a little bit. You cut out some things and you reduce the size of it. So that's a part of it as well. So, but that's one thing. As far as other genres other than science fiction and things like that, like romance, for example, I know I've seen some tremendous selling romance series, but they tend to be a little different most of the time. I mean, I think I remember one series that was a bunch of brothers. I mean, it was 6 or 8 brothers, and every book was a romance about one of the brothers. But they found someone in that book, and that makes it a much more challenging. In a way, it makes it much more challenging series than a science fiction series, because you have to come up with something a little bit different. Now, maybe it's different, maybe it's not, maybe it's the same thing, but at least it's different characters, it's different involvement. But that's a totally different kind of a thing. So I think that is one thing that I really am not qualified to give you a lot of advice on, but I'm just saying, if you write romance, if you write something else, if you write another genre, series work in everything. I mean, just about everything. And I find, in my genre definitely, but in most genres, series are what most readers want. Now, there are definitely readers who don't want it, and you'll see people complaining all the time online. I don't want it. I'm so sick. Everything's a series. And there are too many series now. There are too many books that shouldn't be written that are written as 10 books or 12 books, and the first book shouldn't have been written. I mean, that's the truth. Because people write well, people write badly too, and people who write badly can still write 10 or 12 or 15 or 20 books in a series. So it's and I do think that writing a series is not necessarily the best way to develop as a writer, because I think you're really fighting a lot of things that make you want to do the same thing over and over again. A lot of the bad habits that maybe you have when you're not a good writer, I think, this is just my opinion, and somebody might totally disagree with me, but I do think they're exacerbated a little bit by writing a series, because I think that the tendency to do the same thing over and over again, and it's already building on itself. If you're new to being a writer, or if you want to develop well as being a writer, I would write shorter series. I would write maybe it's like a 3-book series, maybe, or something like that, or just an individual book once in a while, because I really think that then your mind will start working, and you'll crystallize a totally different storyline, and you'll come up with something that makes a lot more sense, and you'll do something different, and you'll develop as a writer, because writing the same thing over and over again, and I can say this having written, like I said, 17 and a half books of this series, it's draining in a way, because it draws the same, you're thinking about the same kind of thing, and it's just harder to make something interesting after 15 or 16 books than it was after one or two. It's harder to write a series. In some ways, it's easier too because you have the same characters. You have a lot of that. I mean, that's definitely true. But I think what people overlook a lot of times is the difficulties in it, and it becomes very, very hard not to do the same thing over and over again. Not to, I mean, how do you come up with something original for the 16th or 17th book? It's hard, and I'll say this right now. My 17th book, I didn't really do. I kind of repeated the 16th book a lot, and I had fans call it out, and this is something that I didn't do for the most part. I managed to not do it a lot, but you get that sometimes, and that also tells you maybe it's time to go on and time to move on the series. So I think one of the important things is the thing you'll all think about: how long can a series be? How long can I take it? How many books can I do? And the answer is essentially limitless. But I think the other question you have to ask yourself all the time, and this is very important, is when should I end it? And that is a very hard thing to do as a writer, especially when you have fans and you have people reading it, and you have people and you get good reviews. I mean, when you're into a book, 10 or 12 books into a series, you only have people who like it reading it, basically. I mean, really. So, you get good reviews, and that goes to your head, and you really have to ask yourself, stop writing it, read it. Okay. So, stop. You really have to stop and think about it and decide, do I have another story left? Do I have more story to tell in this? Maybe you do. But really ask yourself that, and that's the maturity thing, because you really have to ask yourself, do I have more story to tell? Do I have more to do in this? Or is it better that I start winding this down and move on to something else? And that's probably not the kind of thing you expected to hear here, but that's one thing I do think is very, very, very important, in that writers are very, very, it's very easy to get into your writing, into what you're doing. You're thinking about it. You're trying to come up with something to write, and it's hard sometimes to take a unrealistic view of it and say, well, maybe this is past its prime. Maybe it's getting past its prime. Maybe I should move on to something else. That's a very hard thing. You're not going to hear a lot of writers say that. You're not going to see a lot of people who come up and say, maybe 6 books is right, maybe 8 books is right, whatever, because it's just very hard to do. I don't know how to say it, because when you're writing, you're thinking about the writing, and you're into it, and you're positive about it. But when you stop and you go back to it and you read it later, maybe you're this is getting to be the same old, or pretty much the same, or whatever. I have new ideas I want to do. I have new thoughts I want to do, new series I'd like to get going, and you also want to do that. You want to program yourself that you want to have multiple ideas. You don't ever want to get stuck on just one thing. So that's what's really important on it, is being honest, and also maybe having a few readers, a few people who look at it and tell you, who'll be honest with you. That's hard to do with fans sometimes, especially the fans that would become your readers, because they're going to be the craziest fans and the most wild fans, and they're going to love it. I mean, and maybe you sell 100,000 copies when you start, and now you're down to 2,000 copies, and it's terrible, and you should quit, but they're telling you to go because they're the ones who really like it. So you really need to get a couple reliable people to tell you, and you got to make it clear to them you really, really want the truth, and you really want to know, because I'm not going to say all series, because there's probably some things that could go on forever. Obviously, I can think of some series that have probably been going on for hundreds of books, but 95%, 98% of series have a terminus. Doesn't mean they have to end, but they'll start selling less. People will start reading less, and try to figure that out. Try to figure that out ahead of time, so you have a book or two to end it, and that's the way to do that. So, all right, are we? Okay.